Good evening, everyone, and thank you all so much for joining us. My name is Leif Dautch, and I am the chair of the Criminal Law Section and one of the co-chairs of the CLA Racial Justice Committee. Tonight, we are continuing a series of talks organized by that Racial Justice Committee as we make sure that CLA is really meeting this moment that we're in, making sure that as an organization, our policies, our programming, our advocacy are answering the moment and addressing the national reckoning around issues like racial injustice and systemic inequality. So tonight's panel is on the very important topic of intersectionality. And we have a fantastic group of panelists. To introduce those panelists, we have our moderator here, Michael Rhoads. And Michael is a staff attorney at the California Supreme Court, where he works for the Chief Justice. He's also the chair of the court's Equity and Inclusion Committee. He was recently appointed to the State Bar's Commission on Access and Fairness, and he previously, maybe most importantly, previously worked with Basil and I at the California Attorney General's office, as well as in Governor Jerry Brown's administration. I know he's got a great program planned for tonight. So Michael, take it away.
Thanks for that introduction, Leif. Thanks everybody for being with us tonight. And thank you to everyone at CLA, especially Ellen Miller and the Racial Justice Committee for having me as part of this really fantastic group about a really important conversation. The emphasis on the town halls that we've been having recently have all been about sharing personal experiences. And that's really what we're going to be focusing on this evening with our panelists, the experiences that they've had as we look through the lens of racial justice and intersectionality, and especially LGBTQ identity. What we're going to do is have a discussion for about 45 minutes and then leave the last 15 minutes or so at the end for Q&A from the audience. So you folks that are watching, if you have any questions, please just drop them in the chat and we'll try to get through as many as we can at the end. Before we get going, I do want to start with a quick disclaimer, given that a good number of our folks here are government attorneys, or in Judge Kolakowski's case, a sitting judge. And so the disclaimer is that all the views that you're going to hear expressed are the personal views of all of the speakers, and myself included. They shouldn't be attributed to any government organization or other entity, and nor should one speaker's views be attributed to the other panelists. So we all stand on our own. Okay, even if we're not explicitly disagreeing with one another. So with that out of the way, please welcome me, or join me in welcoming our panelists. First, we have the Honorable Victoria Kolakowski. She has been a Superior Court judge in Alameda County since her election in 2010. She was the first openly transgender judge in the nation and has been long been involved in the LGBTQ community, including in roles with the Transgender Law Center, the Judicial Council's Committee on Access and Fairness, and the International Association of LGBT Judges. Thank you so much, Judge Kolakowski, for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Next, we have Anjali Rimi. She is a business development leader for Constellation Brands, a beer, wine, and spirits company that is the largest beer import company in the United States. And she has worked in the corporate world for over 20 years, as well as being active in community building and diversity education work. She co-founded Parivar Bay Area, the first South Asian transgender, gender nonconforming, intersex, and queer organization. And she serves on the board for San Francisco Pride, as well as being a diversity training consultant. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Finally, we have Basil Williams. As Leif said, a former colleague of mine. Basil is a Deputy Attorney General for the state of California in the Appeals, Writs, and Trials section. He's also a legal research and writing lecturer at UC Berkeley School of Law. He came to the United States after living and working in Jamaica, where he worked for the Attorney General's office in Jamaica. He's on the board of Bailiff, the San Francisco LGBTQ Bar Association, and he's also on the Black Employee Advisory Committee at the California AG's office, and is a member of CLA's Racial Justice Work Group. So thank you all for joining us. I'm really excited about hearing a lot of your experiences and hearing about what you have to add to this conversation. I want to start with you, Anjali. and sort of to help us set the stage here. The term intersectionality has really been growing in popularity and in prominence since Professor Kimberly Crenshaw first introduced it in 1989 in her seminal paper, Demarginalizing the Intersection of Race and Sex. But I imagine that not everybody on the call tonight is as intimately familiar as it with our panelists are. And as the term has become more and more mainstream, it's taken on different meanings. Can you sort of set the stage for us and just give us a brief primer on what intersectionality is and the different ways that the term is used?
Absolutely. Good evening, everybody. I'm really glad to be here. And as Michael mentioned, and as Adrieannette already put it in the chat, intersectionality is not a myriad of identities of any given person, but those identities that do not and cannot exist independent of one another and further confluence the discrimination and the oppression that an individual faces. So I'll take my example. I'm a South Asian, I'm an immigrant, I'm a trans woman, I'm a woman. These are all intersectional identities that further create a complex convergence of oppression that I have faced that require me to be subservient and continue to be resistant to how the world treats me. Me being educated, me being a homeowner, me being an English speaker, me being a passing trans woman, as in having a cis passing privilege, cis assuming passing privilege, I should clarify, are not intersectional identities. Those are identities that allow me to blend into this world. The idea behind having intersectionality and that discussion around that is to really bring to forefront the blatant blind spot that continues to exist when we do not talk about these intersections and behave as though they work independently. For example, to say that Black folks are not discriminated in a workplace and neither are women discriminated at a workplace is not to say to conclusively that Black women are not discriminated in a workplace. And then you layer on the intersectionality of trans, it's obviously another intersectionality. Another one I can throw out is gender and then disability in a healthcare system. Those are intersectionalities that immediately cause blatant oppression and discrimination. One of the many purposes of intersectionality is to fight discrimination that exists beyond what you all live in, the legal and the political systems of this community and society. So we can really go beyond that framework and work through that. The downside of intersectionality, as I can speak from my experience, is that as a trans woman of color, my narrative is expected to be homogenized and be very much monopolized in that experience, that lived experience. Whereas so it kind of takes away the diversity within that intersectionality when you kind of juxtapose different identities that I hold. And the other piece is that we kind of get into a level of identity politics when we start playing on intersectionality with broader alliances that could work against each other in terms of intersectionality, because the term in itself, intersection, is bringing together various identities. But when we get so ethnographically centered, then it kind of works against various intersectionalities in this world. So I hope that gave you a little bit of a primer on intersectionality, and we'll talk more as we go through today.
Thanks, Anjali. And it sounds like there's sort of different aspects of it, either being personal identity based, or like you said, looking at it through a focus of legal discrimination or structural discrimination in how that affects people differently. I'd like to sort of open it up to the three of you, given that background, and to hear about how intersectionality as a structural theory or as an intersectional identity has impacted your life and your work. And I do want to have all three of you speak to this. Why don't we start with Judge Kolakowski?
Of course. I'm sorry, I was hoping to go last. But anyway, you know, one of the things about being being parts of different communities and having different things about you is the tendency to be continually pulled in multiple directions. And, you know, for me, and even just a question of being out as a trans woman was a challenging thing. You know, when you look at when I look at how being trans has affected my career, for example, I know that it has. I know that it has because I've had people who independently tell me that it has. I have many friends who were headhunters through the years, and they told me that people would not hire me because I was trans. But it's very hard when you encounter resistance, discrimination in the world, to figure out what the source of it is. First of all, one of the things that happens is that in general, there's a tendency that it's almost like a form of gaslighting. Nobody has a problem with us. They only have a problem with me. You know, they don't have a problem with trans people. It's just, you know, I'm the one that they have a problem with because I'm, you know, not good enough or whatever. And it's not because I'm female. It's not because I'm transgender. It's not because I'm not because I'm in a same-sex relationship, but it's because, well, I'm not as good as everybody else. And there's, that's something that one always struggles with, I think, when you're in multiple roles, is trying to figure out when you encounter things like, for example, microaggressions or things like that, which I can talk about more later. Is that because, which identity is it because of? And what is that really about? And am I reading too much into something? And am I just imagining it? And is this because I'm this type of person or that type of person? And am I expected to speak for just this one group or another? I mean, here I am on a panel, we're talking about intersectionality, and I'm, you know, probably one of the whitest people on here. And so, but I'm still being invited to speak on panels that deal with issues like this. I wanted to, I mean, there are lots of things I can talk about my experience as a trans person, but trying to figure out how that fits in intersectionally has been a challenge, and it's something that I've actually been wondering about for the past 30 years as I've gone through my career, which is now 31 years into my legal career, and figuring out which part of me is the good part, which part of me isn't the good part, which part of me people have a problem with, and can I modulate one part of me to make it so that I'm more acceptable to people, and should I? And even the question of, is part of the intersectionality of who I am. Now I'm a judge, which is its own which is not even just a profession, but it's almost like it's calling, and it's a 24/7 thing. And that's part of my identity as well. And so is that part of my intersectionality? Is that part of my identity that overlaps and that's in conflict perhaps with others? And these are the sorts of things that, you know, I just think about, you know, just in passing every night, you know, whatever, having dinner, chatting with friends, the usual. But I may come back. I'm going to talk more later about some things, but since I'm the first one, I figured I would just do that. Okay, I'd like to hear from somebody else.
Anjali, why don't you pick up on that? What do you think about at night?
What do I think about at night? When will this lockdown be over so I could see you all in person? Well, I'll begin there by saying this is not an intersectionality from an identity standpoint, but it's an intersectional trait all of us are going through. Being socially isolated. And as a trans woman, I will take you through that journey of intersectionality. Trigger warnings. When I was a very young kid in India, we were not very well to do, and I'm dark skinned in the Indian standards of fair culture. So I was already at the intersectionality of not being treated correctly. So I'm living with low access to resources. I'm dark skinned. And at the age of 14, I was sexually abused, or what I come to call now raped. And that is an intersectional identity because now I'm an abuse survivor. that I had to live through. Then I come to this country to try to be myself, to transition, and I'm now at the intersectionality based on my immigrant status. I faced a lot of hate crimes because I came here a month before 9/11. I was in a very white state doing my MBA, and that intersectionality of being an immigrant, of being a person whose English had an interesting accent was already difficult. And then when I transitioned, I'm now at the height of my intersectionality, in my opinion, of being a trans woman, an immigrant that is trying to survive. Now, this is where I tried to hide, as Vicky was mentioning. I can call her Vicky, we go back long ways.
Yeah. And she's not an attorney, so she doesn't have to worry about
Exactly. I don't have all those disclaimers. But I went back into stealth. Stealth is a term that is used when a trans person who can cis assume and pass takes away that identity of theirs, that doesn't disappear, but doesn't recognize with it. So I went back into stealth, and guess what? I was in corporate America trying to grow up the ladder, but I was a woman of color, a brown South Asian woman of color that was not found to be equally competent based on my performance, but based on my identity. So the intersectionality and the identity, the oppression, the subservience, the negligence did not go away. Then I got married to a Muslim man. And based on religion, my intersectionality now played another role, because now I'm not allowed into my temples. I'm not a Hindu in the South Asian communities and in the greater communities. And with the Islamophobia that is so rampant, I had another intersection. So none of the previous ones went away. Now we are just adding on. It's like I was collecting degrees, which is what my parents would be very happy if I did, because that's what we do in Indian culture. But I'm just like giving you an example of how one continues or tries to build, and I can speak from my experience that intersectionality doesn't ever go away. And now for the last 5 years since I've been back in the Bay Area, well, I should take a step back. When I got married, I was married to a Muslim man. I was in Canada because I was kicked out of this country for being trans, and I was fired from my work in California. And so there's that other intersectionality, that now I'm a non-resident alien, as they put it in my passport. And then I come back to this country, and then I'm trying to be open, and now I'm a trans woman of color, a brown trans woman. And my narrative is expected to be at that intersectionality, a homogenized experience of being homeless, being a tragic story. But I'm further away from that. So intersectionality for me has always existed in my life. And it's fascinating because I identify as a pansexual woman, and that kind of has its own, as Vicky was touching on it, that is another intersectionality. When you're not hetero, it doesn't matter if you're cis or trans, that's another intersectionality that plays another role on top of that. So it's really something that I have forever continued to revolt and fight and dominate the non-intersectional identities of mine, but they have never really allowed me to escape those. And so continuously, at all times, I'm trying to build my privilege so I can mask my intersectional identities. And so I proudly say I'm a trans woman of color, I'm a South Asian, I'm an immigrant, I'm a rape survivor. I have transcended of living everywhere in this world, you know, but the fact of the matter is that the intersectional play, and even in this room right here, there's 54 of us, we all carry that intersectionality, and how we have to navigate every single day to prove our merit and not allow that to cloud our competency is just real. It's just very much real, and it's right here.
Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciated that, especially the part of trying to find your identity and sit in the intersection in a way that gives you power, while also acknowledging that those are the very reasons that a lot of people are trying to take away your power. Mm-hmm. That probably resonates with a lot of people. Basil, can you share a little bit about your background?
Sure. As Michael said, I am originally from Jamaica. I've been here approximately 6 years now. And prior to coming here, I worked at the AG's office in Jamaica. Going back to, I think, the original question Michael asked, I think it was, how has my intersectionality in life or work? Growing up in Jamaica, Jamaica is one of the most homophobic countries in the world. One of my first experiences, or I should say first, but one of my most impactful experiences in Jamaica was in as being gay, was basically mobbed by the entire school. The entire campus had to be shut down. It was like an all-boy 1,400 Catholic school body, and the entire campus had to be shut down for the entire day. Cops had to eventually come he had to be barricaded inside the dean's office for several hours until cops could come and spirit him out and get him to safety at the end of the day. And it was just chaos. And I just remember this mob mentality clamoring for basically his head. And that for me was just a very shocking and impactful event that really drastically changed my outlook on life. And so, of course, there is no such thing as being openly gay in a country such as that. Until you do what you do to get by, worked hard, did well in school, got to the AG's office in Jamaica. And my goal, honestly, was to effect meaningful change in Jamaica. And I thought one of the best ways to do that was to work for the government, eventually get to the bench, and hopefully have meaningful change through the judiciary in Jamaica. But you start to realize that these things are not quite possible as a gay man in Jamaica. And so, for example, when I worked at the Attorney General's office there was a constitutional challenge to consensual sexual relationships between same-sex individuals. I was one of the attorneys who was supposed to be defending the constitutionality of the criminal prohibition, but I couldn't in good conscience work on a case like that, so I had to politely decline. And it was at that point, I think that was kind of an inflection point for me, where I was just like, it's not going to be possible to remain in this country and be true to myself and my identity. But so in Jamaica, that was my burden, basically. So I decided, okay, where can I go to? America was the easiest option, and that was great. But then, in addition to being gay, you are then confronted with race. I then had to navigate racial waters, which I didn't have to face before in Jamaica because it's 90-something% Black. Imagine when I am doing my LLM at Hastings, I walk into a classroom with 80 students in, I think it was maybe copyright law or something. And instantly I realized that I was the only Black male in the room. In law school in Jamaica, for example, you could easily blend into a crowd. But suddenly I became aware that if I'm absent, it will be obvious that the one Black kid is absent from class. I had never thought about those things until I moved to this country, where I walk into a room and instantly I realize that no one else looks like me. And that was definitely a jarring and new experience, where I was in the majority 95% Black in Jamaica to coming here in San Francisco, where it's 5% Black, and it was just a very different experience that I suddenly became acutely aware of. And then also navigating my sexual identity on top of that. I, for example, recall because our office has locations all throughout the state, San Francisco, Sacramento, Fresno, and unfortunately we do not have locality pay. And someone said the justification is you can simply go wherever and live there. And I'm just like, as a Black gay immigrant, I don't quite feel comfortable going to, say, the Riverside office to go live there. That is just not an option that is really open for someone like me. And just these various overlapping identities I then had to be navigating. Also, folks complimenting my English, which I thought was quite strange. It's a compliment I never got in Jamaica before because it's my only language. So to be told that your English is good and the look of surprise when someone tells you that, it was a bit strange, I think. And so just these various identities and navigating microaggressions has definitely been an experience, but because of my identity as a gay man in Jamaica, that changed my life, changed the trajectory completely. And then in America, now I'm a Black gay immigrant, and that has also impacted my life and various aspects of my career. I don't know to what extent Michael wishes us to continue, but I will give the floor back to Michael.
We're almost at 6:30, which is, I mean, I'm not surprised because all of your stories are really gripping, and I appreciate you sharing all of those. I think one of the themes that is coming out, or that is violence that comes up when you're dealing with folks that are in intersectional identities. I think one of the things that we've been seeing is that trans women of color, and especially trans Black women, have been central to the queer rights movement, have been central to racial justice movements and to Black Lives Matter. But at the same time, they're frequently marginalized within those movements and they're victims of violence. I know that the Human Rights Campaign has said that there have already been 22 transgender victims of violence who have been killed in 2020 alone, and the majority of those are trans Black women. And that doesn't even count victims like Iana Dior, who was beaten by a mob in a Minnesota convenience store. I'm gonna give this question to Anjali, but either Basil or Judge Kolakowski can jump in as well. What can intersectionality tell us about why this is happening, why we have this marginalization within movements and violence against specifically trans Black women, and what needs to be done to really make all communities, but especially the LGBT community and the Black communities, more responsive to what is really a really horrific reality?
I always gasp for air when I have to talk about this, because I think a Black trans woman would be the right person to talk about this. But being their ally, I will do my best. And I will begin by saying that a lot of the API community that I belong to, API LGBT, API trans, however you slice and dice the intersectionality, we have all, when I say we, let me just start from an I rather than generalizing, come to agree and believe that we can celebrate when one intersectionality is uplifted, believing that everyone is uplifted. But the reality of the matter is this intersectionality of Black trans women and men, because Tony McDade was also killed this year, does not necessarily just go away because one intersectionality is uplifted. The other reason is because of the parsing of identities. When Black Lives Matter movement begins, it should and always should have included Black trans lives matter, but that was left behind. When it came to trans lives, in corporate America, you see, I cannot find another trans woman of color who's in a leadership role like me. And America is not a small place. corporate America is not a small place either. And why trans women are now in the leadership positions and positions of employment to begin with. So again, coveting and filling the blank to say, yes, trans is taken care of, is not okay, because you're leaving behind the sub intersectionality of Black trans women. And I think the third aspect to bring about is the blatant violence because of the anti-Blackness that exists in the system, and compounded to that, the transphobia that's rampant in so many frameworks of community and direct services and care. All these compound to make Black trans life so difficult that the average lifespan of a Black trans woman was 35. Well, if you take the last 3 years, the number of trans women and men that have been killed is over 20. This year, we are in a pandemic, and we've already lost 24. And we've lost trans women as young as 17 years old. So if you do that math, you're looking at an average lifespan of 30 years. And there are many reasons why this happened. I've talked about the cruel system that really eradicates the access of Black trans folks to education, to housing, the really toxic transphobia that exists in the masculine community, the absence of any community ties and family acceptance, and blatant discrimination of work clouding that Black trans person's ability to work. I have yet to meet a Black trans woman in corporate America. I have yet to see a Black trans woman be able to own a home and be successful, because the system has been so compounding the barriers to this intersectionality that survival is a strategy for Black trans intersectionality, leave alone trying to go past that and to thrive. So what can be done? I think it is about understanding that everything we do, all my work I do, is needing to be centered around Black trans folks, because I cannot continue to say, I am needing to be uplifted, I am needing to be emancipated. It's not a personal epiphany that I have to get every 3 years. It's about uplifting and centering and doing everything around Black trans folks, because they have never been given the same starting point or starting line as any one of us.
Now, one of the things that you had asked about was the question of, well, first of all, I wanted to say a quick one-time out thing, which is nothing that I am saying has anything to do with any pending case or controversy. And so do not interpret anything I say as my position on any pending case or controversy. Judge disclaimer. Okay, so now, one of the things about intersectionality is that when you have multiple groups that are, first of all, what you wind up with in a system like ours is you often will wind up with different groups of people fighting for scraps of a pie. And different groups, when you have multiple identities, sometimes those identities, the groups do not see themselves as being common, but rather to be in some ways almost as antagonistic. So the question becomes, who gets their rights first? Do we want to push for these people? Those aren't our concerns. This is something that that we've seen that's gone back over a century in this country. Questions about, who should we care about first? Black people, or should we care about women? Should women be concerned about, what about women and about lesbians? Do lesbians fit into the feminist community, or do they not? What do you do if you're a Black lesbian? What do you do if you're a Black trans lesbian? You wind up with these different groups, you get pulled in a million different directions, and it's very challenging. One of the things we live in a society where discrimination based upon race is a real thing, that it impacts people's employment and housing and other things. Discrimination against transgender people, the same thing. When you have multiple strikes against you, when it becomes even harder. And so one of the things that I have often done when I've gone and spoken to various groups and people say, what should we do? And I say, hire trans people, especially to hire trans people of color, because, everybody says, oh, I want to be an ally, I want to help. Fine, hire people. Because, you can say whatever you want to and support, you can make statements or positions, but the problem is that ultimately it boils down to when the rubber meets the road and how do people actually get through life. And what Anjali is saying is absolute. I have the same exact experience in terms of trans women of color have trans women have an awful time. You know how few trans women there are in positions where, we actually have anything at all. And we fought like anything to get to this point. And even so, we're so much better off than our African-American sisters. And there's so many different ways in which we get pulled. Anyway, I just wanted to say that.
Thanks, Judge Kolakowski. Basil, can you sort of pick up on that thread in terms of, you're a member of Bailiff, like I mentioned, you're a member of the AG's office, Black Employee Advisory Committee, you're on CLA's Racial Justice Committee. How do you see those types of organizations or other bar associations that aren't necessarily minority-based, like Child Association, what kind of role do those groups have in addressing these problems? How can they better address the experiences of their membership when their membership have intersectional identities that really impact their careers?
That's a good question. What I think definitely really helps is visibility definitely helps, and having people with various identities in positions where they can be influential. I think that definitely helps. I also think one thing that various organizations could do is to collaborate with various groups like Bailiff, collaborating with the Charles Houston Bar Association, for example, or various groups I think can get together. And I'm on the board of Bailiff, and I am a community ambassador. I'm also volunteering as an ambassador for the Attorney General's office, trying to foster various outreach efforts with different bar associations, and to just basically get people more involved, and to hire folks in positions of power and influence. And I think that definitely helped. It's one thing to say, that you want to help or that you have the best of intentions, but those intentions and that speech needs to be matched with hard, tangible actions. And I think those are definitely some ways that can help. I also think that you can even write letters of support in terms of pending legislation or bills that might be before the legislature that will make a difference. And I think that volunteering at various events, and for folks who work in the private sector, pushing the managing partners or pushing your organization to hire more folks of color and people with intersectional identities. So, because it's one thing to have statements of support or issuing a statement supportive of various groups or various causes. And it's an entirely different story to actually back that up with actually getting out there and doing the legwork and hiring folks in positions that can make a big difference. And I think a great starting point is collaborating with various groups.
I think one of the comments I'm hearing, and especially that's coming out in the comments, is that is this concept of the pie and having to share different slices of the pie. And I think this is a question for you, Judge Kolakowski. Yeah. When we look at a lot of times demographic studies, so the State Bar just came out with its annual diversity report card, California has their annual judicial demographics report card, and those sometimes will break down folks by ethnicity, but oftentimes, like the diversity report card, for instance, categorizes all LGBTQIA folks in one category. So we don't know, for instance, when folks are responding to how their workplace satisfaction or opportunities for mentorship or advancement, we don't know statistically how a trans color is being treated differently than a white cis gay man like myself. How big of a problem is this, and how do we fight getting too granular such that we're sort of pitting the different groups against each other, but at the same time we want to know what those numbers are?
You know, it's really difficult, and I've been involved in the process of trying to track what goes on with LGBT lawyers in the state of California since the 1990s, when I was co-chair of the Bar Association of San Francisco's Committee on Gay and Lesbian Issues. And when I was one of the initial members of what was then the State Bar of California's Commission on Sexual Orientation Discrimination, Committee on Sexual Orientation Discrimination, which was eventually merged in with one of the things that we've seen over the years was that we started out with all these different groups that were trying to push for their own groups, for their own identities, and to make sure that we were included and weren't forgotten. And then we all wound up getting lumped in together. And then what happened was then eventually they felt that the problems were all solved, and so all these committees went away. Or what they get together once a year and they have a banquet or something and say, look how wonderful we are. One of the problems that we run into is when you talk about this is sometimes we're dealing with really small numbers. I can tell you right now that one of the things I often try to figure out is how few words can you uniquely describe me by other than my name? And in my case, I can tell you there's 3 words. You go into Google right now and put in California transgender judge, and everything on the page will be me, because I'm the only one. And so the problem becomes when we've kept when there's such a small group of people, when we start looking at the overlaps become sui generis of the category of these overlaps. And part of that's because of the fact that these categories, the groups of people, are not properly being represented as how they are in the world at large. And so one of the things that can happen, one of the things that I appreciate Bailiff, for example, was part of a number of organizations that recently sent a letter to the governor saying that asking for the next Supreme Court appointment be somebody who is LGBT and or a person of color, preferably both, but but the idea that people could see that there's that we're kind of all in this together, that it's not like we're fighting over the same scraps. One of the things that's a challenge for all of us is whenever we're there in a sense, in a representative capacity, like people will want me to be, because I'm the only transgender judge. I can't talk about what it's like to be a trans man and a judge, because I'm not one, or what it would be like to be, and we have none in this country, or to be a person of color and a judge, because we don't have any on this continent. And so one of the things that's a challenge is that we're presented with this notion that there's nobody out there, sort of like, it's one of those sort of things about, hiring people. Well, we can't find qualified anything. That's nonsense. People are there. It's just that nobody wants to look, and nobody wants to deal with the fact that people sometimes, in order to get along with that the cost of living an intersectional life often is opportunities denied and challenges that we cannot overcome by ourselves. One of the things I think that's important is for us to not so break ourselves down so much that we're all our own individual world of just this smorgasbord of individual identities, but that we're part of a community. We're part of communities, and that these communities overlap, but we should be able to be part of all of them. You shouldn't have to choose which identity you have, and which one matters. We shouldn't be fighting with each other. And so we shouldn't be having the intersectionality should not be conflict. It should be unity. The fact that we overlap is something that's our strength of our diversity. It's not a weakness, but it's used that way by people who have everything and do not want to share any of it, who believe that treating everyone equally means that we're in a zero-sum game and that they lose. And sometimes, actually we make the pie bigger by being more inclusive. And so, anyway.
Thank you for that. I think that's well taken. One of the things that you talked about too is that a lot of folks when they bring their authentic selves, they get punished for it, especially folks with intersectional identities. And so this sort of takes me to Anjali. And I think right now we're in a moment where a lot of companies and law firms are talking a big game about how much they value diversity. They value racial justice. They want to be a part of this movement. They want their employees to be a part of this movement. And they are advocating for their employees to get involved with, for example, employee resource groups, which I believe you were part of the LGBTQ employee resource group at one of your prior jobs. But sometimes that's just big talk, and they don't actually want their employees to really bring their authentic selves. They just want the intersectional identity without any of the baggage or the actual persons that come behind it. Can you talk about kind of why LGBT people and others with intersectional identities aren't really valued even in that kind of culture of diversity talk?
I'll try to do it without getting myself in trouble. But very early on in my transition, which is, I always transition as trying to assimilate into this world. I walked into my workplace about 17 years ago now. Oh my God, I'm dating myself. I walked into my workplace in a gray pantsuit and thought, oh, was it? I was never needing to ever explain myself over again. But let me tell you, the next 4 years of my life were so painful that I tried to kill myself to deciding to go into complete stealth for the next 13 years of my life. I have been in stealth. I have not told a single soul. None of my ex-husband's entire family knows that I'm trans till date. And that's because there is a lot of talk and very little action. There is very little done to make me feel safe and secure. And you see, trans folks, trans people of color, we come from intersectionality, immigrant, poverty, non-masculine identities. And we have built systems of resilience. We have built systems of survival. And so when something is given to us, we are all about action. Our biggest strength is bias for action. We want to go about and make those changes. So when I went about doing that, I was very quickly put into this bucket of, we got you covered, sit over the edges, we got you, we're going to cover you at the table, to a point where I had put together a presentation on how to hire, well, they already had hired a Black trans person. And I said, well, if you're going to hire a trans person, leave alone a Black trans person, make sure we have gender neutral restrooms, because if they're early in their transition, it's so much more difficult. And I'm using this example because I'm surrounded by lawyers, so I feel a little safe to be a little vulnerable, that no one's going to come after me. But the point of I was told to give that presentation over to a cis gay man, white cis gay man, who was going to present it next day. Talk about co-opting and having some level of appropriation into my lived experience, because we are all in the alphabet soup. And I will go on to the extent to say that the most discrimination I've faced is because of the cisness in the LGBT community. And that hasn't stopped corporate America, because a lot of these employee resource groups and such are led by cis folks. And it is high time that they step aside. But by doing and hiring trans women of color, trans folks of color, Black trans folks, that action automatically becomes inevitable, because when we are in the room, we are not going to keep quiet, because we are all about change. I can give many examples, but I think the point I'm trying to make is that it's a lot about tokenizing. It's a lot about that talk versus doing the action. And there are perfect catalysts, including HRC, and I can talk to you about HRC offline, of what damage they've caused to Black trans folks in this country, that continue to perpetuate this behavior by awarding and saying, oh my God, you did such a great job. Well, you know what? That's even more dangerous. When we believe that we have achieved a solution, that's even more dangerous when we have actually not even scratched the surface of what the problem is. So I can continue on and give you a lot of instances, but I'll pause there.
Thank you. And I want to be mindful of our time too. We've got a little less than 10 minutes. So if folks have any questions, please do them in the chat. But I want to sort of use Anjali's experience in corporate America and pivot to Basil, who's worked in the government sphere in Jamaica and in the States, and has also been, a lecturer in academia, to ask what experience are the same or different, or whether there are particularly unique challenges there.
Well, with using Jamaica as the example, I remember when the constitutional challenge to the laws, when that case came across my desk and my supervisor was discussing it, she laughed and said, can you imagine these gay men? They think that they have these so-called rights. She did them in quotes. And she was just very offended by the thought. And when I had to decline the case, I couldn't say why, but she knew at that point why I was declining the assignment. So it was quite an awkward moment that we just never discussed, but it was fine. I left for Hastings after that. And then after I completed Hastings and I was working at the AG's office, I was invited at Hastings to teach legal writing. And I jumped at the opportunity. It was going really well, I thought, initially in my first semester teaching. And I had 2 TAs in my class, one Latina woman and a white woman. They were both, I want to say 2Ls. But at some point during the semester, my white TA decided that she disagreed with something that I said in my teaching. And she decided, instead of saying something to me after class or highlighting it to me, I just noticed that she had this look on her face during my class when I was lecturing. But I put it out of my mind. I'm just like, Basil, you're just imagining things. She's not trying to challenge your authority or anything. You're just imagining it, basically. But I subsequently got an email from the faculty saying that essentially they got a troublesome report from said TA, or from one of my TAs, I should say. I spoke to my Latina TA. She said that she thought the class was going well. She didn't say anything to anyone about anything because she didn't think that there was anything to report other than that I was doing a good job. My other TA I spoke to, and she said she just had some concerns and she thought that it would be best to bring it up to the head of the faculty. And at that point, I was still relatively new to this country, and I was just a bit stunned at the brazenness, I suppose, of this, of this woman. But I was also disappointed in how the faculty responded, because they responded by sending a senior lecturer to observe my class based on the word of this one TA. And basically his job was to review my performance and see if her claims actually bore fruit. But he observed and he wrote a report, and his report was glowing. He said I was one of the best teachers on staff, and he had no complaints whatsoever, and he thought that the TA was way out of line, and that basically that she needed to be put in her place. And while there was some degree of vindication, I think that was the first time in my life I had ever had my competence called into question. And it was a new and I think strange experience for me. And also how the faculty responded to it, I thought it just really left a poor taste in my mouth, a sour taste in my mouth. And you're then left wondering, why did this happen? Is it because I am an immigrant? Is it because I'm Black? She felt so comfortable to raise this, but also separate and apart from her deciding to go directly to the faculty. What I was also quite alarmed by their response, which was to put someone in my class immediately based on the word of this one person. And I think that was a difficult thing navigating. And then also, but it led me to Berkeley, and I'm teaching at Berkeley, and so I am quite happy there, and it's going well. But even in teaching at Berkeley now, I teach international students, and so I find myself maybe wondering if I should censor myself on certain issues relating to my sexuality when I'm teaching, for example, students from Saudi Arabia or from varying countries, which just to avoid having an awkward or confrontational class. And I don't want to detract from the lesson that I have with my own personal story. And so it's just all of these varying identities always maybe sometimes clashing, or I have to be circumspect about what I divulge or what I don't divulge. And it is just difficult sometimes navigating these various waters.
I just want to say one thing, which is at least, Basil, that they sent somebody in. So often people don't even get a chance to redeem themselves. That what happens is that these kind of things get said behind people's backs, and they become, you know, people, it's common knowledge that, or you have a reputation or things like that. And that's one of the kind of things that we face. Absolutely.
Thank you all for sharing all of and being really open with your experiences and with your stories. It's been pretty heavy stuff, so I want to try to do one last question, mindful of the time, if you can be as brief as possible, to give us something that gives you hope, something about having an intersectional identity, or working in this field or living in this moment that really gives you hope. Basil, why don't we start with you, and then we'll go to Anjali and Judge Kolakowski can close this out.
Well, I am given hope by how LGBT friendly San Francisco is. My first job after leaving Hastings, I was working at the Court of Appeal, and I worked with Justice Humes, and he was an openly gay judge, and that was just something I never thought I would see in my lifetime, let alone having the privilege of working for him. And I think that was one of my most hopeful experiences that really changed my outlook.
I think I'm living in positive energy with you all being here. I see a lot of people of color, so I'm recruiting you to really center Black trans folks, Black, brown, queer, people of color in every effort and every work you do. And let me just remind that all of us have privilege. And I really, really stress on you to use that privilege to call those underrepresented voices in powerfully. So that gives me a lot of hope that there's a lot of you doing the work, and obviously hope that you will offer free legal services when we reach out.
You know what, one of the things that makes me so excited is that I've seen so much change over the course of my career and even over the last few years. And as a judge, people outside the bench don't get to see the kind of education that we are getting about, that we get trained on implicit bias, that we're dealing with issues of intersectionality, that we have ethics trainings now where I got to help participate in preparing a vignette that everybody has to see about how to deal with people's pronouns. That I'm regularly speaking, doing podcasts and things that people are watching on the judiciary, which unfortunately can't be shared with everybody else. I wish they could. But there are a lot of people who really care, who are really trying to make a difference, who really are trying to be open and trying to learn. That I'm on videos like this so often, and that I get to participate in these things because there's so much dialogue going on right now, that the judges are internally amongst ourselves having these kind of discussions just for ourselves, where we're talking about race and sexual orientation and things like that. And so we have a long way to go, but I think never before have I've seen so many people who are understanding of the fact that we need to make changes, and that they're so open and willing to consider it and to listen to each other. People are listening to each other in ways that I haven't seen before. And so I'm really excited about what the future can hold.
Well, on that positive note, thank you all so much for sharing your stories. Michael for moderating tonight, Basil, Judge Kolakowski, Anjali, very moving, very informative. I wish we could go on for another hour. I also wanted to give a quick shout out to our co-chairs for the Racial Justice Committee that we have on here. I see Terrance Evans, I see Adrieannette Ciccone, I see Ellen Miller, I see Marjaneh Maroufi. It's been such an honor to work with you over the last couple months. And we've got some exciting stuff ahead. We've got 2 upcoming programs, one on Thursday on accessing police officer discipline files, which is like the least sexy thing imaginable, but is so important. We're going to have someone from the criminal law section looking at the criminal perspective of that through pitches motions, but then also someone from labor and employment looking at police officer discipline, looking at the civil litigation aspects as well. So that's at 5:30 this Thursday as a free webinar. And then we've also got a really exciting program coming up on August 5th on microaggressions in the courtroom. And we've got judges Birdsong and Douglas to talk about what they've seen. I'm sure Judge Kolakowski could fill an hour just with some of the stuff she's seen in the courtroom. So thank you again for joining us. And we hope to see you this Thursday and on the 5th. Have a good night, everyone.